Hello all, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3, and in this particular video I want to talk to you about test assessment and evaluation, particularly within college and university, but this is also really important for high school as well and elementary school. It's sort of thinking about test assessment and evaluation. So if you don't know me, I'm Associate Professor of Innovation Strategy and Entrepreneurship. And I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people that help me out that I want to pay the favor forward and help you out as much as I possibly can. All right, so I just spent the last couple of weeks, probably the last month, thinking about what is the best way to sort of assess capabilities and skills for students. Took a deep dive in the literature. I study learning, and I take I look to see at how people sort of understand things and companies understand things and sort of make sense of what's going on. And I wanted to take a deep dive. This is sort of part of a project of thinking about, taking this deep dive in assessment. It's sort of one aspect of it. I don't want to give it away in any sort of way, but it turns out that it's really difficult and challenging to understand and really get a sense of what people know about a certain subject. And the reason is that it really depends on what your philosophy of knowledge and philosophy of what actually knowledge looks like, and what it really, what you can do with that particular knowledge, right? So if you assume that there is this reality outside of you, and that this reality is fixed and it doesn't change, and that everybody sort of understands the exact same reality, then it makes sense that we should perform testing in one way. But if you assume that everybody's situation is very different, and that we are placed in very different situations on a regular basis every single day, then you're probably going to assess things in a slightly different way, right? So I want to get into a couple of these things in terms of, or three ways that I think that there is differences between, testing and assessment and evaluation at colleges and universities. But again, this applies to elementary school and high school as well. So, the first way is sort of the standard method in terms of testing and evaluation. This is what we sort of assume in terms of looking at, item response theory, I guess it's called. But really, it's thinking at, multiple choice questions. We have some sort of fixed reality that we have, and that we're trying to assess people's capabilities of understanding that sort of fixed reality of what the world actually looks like. So this has a long history, and it's cool. I was really super excited to understand what's going on, but it actually has some really deep roots within scientific management. And Frederick Taylor, that came, I think it was around 1915 or so, and this was sort of the first management revolution that happened in terms of understanding how to manage people. And at that time, we thought, and we had this sort of understanding that the world worked. And if you read Frederick Taylor, yes, it's a little messy, to say the least, because it's got some weird cultural norms from the time. In terms of what management looked like, and that's changed over many years. But what we assumed that people sort of behaved like was much more mechanical, like a machine, in terms of that they're just simply executing on something, that there's this fixed reality in what the world looks like, and that people are just executing on that fixed reality. And it's no surprise if you were looking at in Frederick Taylor's sort of classic study that he did, or classic work that he did, was in a steel plant. I think it was a steel plant, Bethlehem steel plant, and was looking at how people sort of move things from place to place. There's lots of people doing the same jobs over and over and over again, and it sort of made sense that there was this sort of mechanical nature of how people did things. And so we did, he did sort of time and motion studies, looking to see how you can reduce the time to do something by reducing the number of motions that somebody actually did. And this is really readily used in a lot of different areas still to this day in, say, automotive manufacturing. A lot of manufacturing does this kind of stuff. And really what you're looking at is these repetitive motions and trying to reduce the number of repetitive motions that happen. There is also a literature, and this is why it's really cool, that has informed, a lot of education, and it is looking at, things like behavioral learning or reinforcing learning. And there's lots of literature in management that is sort of based on this. It's actually become a dominant sort of perspective in our field, or one of the dominant perspectives in our fields. It's looking at how, people perform actions, or something performs actions, and you get reinforced. There's feedback based on that action, and then you sort of repeat that particular action depending on whether it was pleasurable or not pleasurable. This sort of feeling and this sort of perspective got baked into, at least from what I understand, it got baked into how to do testing and assessment in, universities, high schools, colleges, stuff like that. Because there was kind of like a revolution in terms of understanding what education actually looks like. And so if there's education people out there, they're probably going to, correct me and stuff. And that's awesome. If you can leave comments and stuff like that, that would be helpful for other people. And so what ended up happening, and because education became much more important, there was people coming online. It wasn't just for the elite few where people were just getting educated, that there was many people coming online. So we had to think about how to do this stuff in a standardized way. And we assumed that what we were trying to do is assume people on, their skill and capability in terms of what they actually look like, and that we assumed that some people were extraordinary good and some people were not extraordinary good in terms of, IQ tests and stuff like that. And what we did is what we were trying to do is select out the people that weren't extraordinary good and just focused on the people that were really good. And then we sort of pushed them along within the process. That was sort of the dominant view. I would say it's still kind of a dominant view in terms of education. But, there has been some really important changes in terms of what is going on here. And I think it's actually been historically around for a very long time in terms of debates, in terms of what we think about how things actually happen. So in that, in the former, in terms of, testing and stuff like that, you'd probably focus on, multiple choice questions, really getting at a core concept. A lot of assessment's going to be looking at, okay, what are we going to teach in this particular module? How are we going to teach to get to that thing? That's where core, Common Core and things like that sort of are deeply rooted in, is sort of assessing people across the board and assuming that everybody should learn all the exact same stuff, and that there is a best way to do a particular thing. Now, there is, a couple of other ways that I think about in terms of how learning actually gets done, and what I would sort of think about. One way is situational, and there was a debate that happened. Lave and Wenger. I think Wegener's at Carnegie Mellon University, and Lave, is that NYU, or was that NYU? So Lave and Wenger sort of made this assessment or, idea that much of life is situational. And I actually believe that. I think that much of life is situational. It changes from time to time, and every time that you're in a different environment, things are very different. That's why, if you do testing at, so it was really funny. I did my undergrad in engineering, and I learned all this crazy, really interesting stuff in engineering sort of knowledge. But then when I went and actually applied it in the real world, all that stuff went out the window. I was only applying just, really tiny stuff. In terms of what was really going on in the world around us. And that's because a lot of stuff is situational. That's why people can kind of fake things, if you don't get training as a medical doctor, for example. And I'm not saying you do this. And I'm always making fun of my wife who's in the healthcare field, is that I can go and perform her job. And the reason is that you don't necessarily need that sort of core knowledge to perform the day-to-day stuff. You just have to, console people a lot of time in healthcare, telling them to go do this thing. A lot of the stuff is always the same stuff that pops up on a regular basis. So it'd be 60 to 70% of the same stuff all the time. that's constantly popping up. And so you will get practice at that and you will know what's going on. You don't necessarily need to know all the ins and outs of what's going on behind the scenes, right? All that sort of deep-rooted knowledge. And so what you would do in terms of, if you believe this, and I believe that there's, a combination of what's going on, is that you would get people to go into a situation and you would sort of assess. You would try to maybe do a mock simulation of some sort, right? Or a simulated environment of some sort. So medical doctors will go and they'll practice on dummies, and then we will, throw something weird that goes on in their environment. Maybe there's a cardiac arrest or something like that happens, and then the students have to deal with what's going on in the background. If you're a management student, we would throw you in a mock simulation. Sometimes you will simulate things on a computer. You do a lot of simulations these days in computers. Sometimes you will actually, maybe do a simulated interview, for example, and, you would throw out weird things that might happen. We do this a lot, right? So this is more of the apprentice kind of style learning, where you go and do something and sort of learn the craft as you're doing that, and thinking about how to make things, more like an apprentice really makes a lot of sense sometimes in terms of what's going on. There's a third way that I think has not got as much play, but, it is this idea that a lot of what we do is about just learning by doing and sort of getting put into, it's not necessarily a situation, but just getting put into a context, and you have to think about how to understand what the opportunities are and where you're going to go along in this dimension. So it's not quite sort of situational, I don't think. It's more of an entrepreneurial approach. I sort of teach entrepreneurship, and there's this kind of cool idea that I've heard about. I've never actually done it, but I've always wanted to do it, is you give everybody $1 in your classroom and you say, come back, and this is all you're going to get is $1, and you got to go and make as much money as you possibly can with that $1. Well, students go out and do all sorts of crazy things. Some people might say that, this is a constraint, they're not going to do anything. Other people are going to not even use that dollar and come back with, $1,000, $5,000 because they've learned a different way to go about of doing things. It's not the constraint that is really important with those things. And so in that circumstance, what you're getting people to think about, and students to think about, is that the world can be crafted and built, and you're thinking about people in terms of how they deal with opportunities going forward. So you're encouraging them just to kind of go and explore and not think about, the world is fixed. And those two other ways kind of assumes that the world is fixed in a lot of ways. But it's not. It's constantly changing, it's evolving. So that's why we run into a lot of issues in science, for example, with people doubting science. And in this day and age, lots of people are saying that science doesn't work. Scientists don't know what they're talking about. It's not true at all. It's just that the state of science constantly is evolving. We're learning new things. We're getting new methodologies. It's constantly evolving because people are going out and doing these particular things. And so the science is really concrete in a lot of areas, right? So, it's 2020, COVID-19. The science, from what I could see, is actually pretty relatively robust. But lots of people don't believe in that because it's constantly changing and evolving and stuff. So these three ways in terms of doing, in terms of what you're understanding how people actually behave and what they look like, are going to be evaluated in different ways, right? So the first one is you're probably going to do a lot of multiple choice, assuming that there's, concrete knowledge that's out there. The second one, you're probably going to put people into some sort of situation, mock situation. You see how they behave in that sort of situation, and how they respond is what you're going to be, assessing them on. So at university, we have, maybe it's public speaking, for example, and seeing how they behave in that certain dimension, and you're trying to assess how other people are assessing what they're doing. And then the last one is you just say, go and do something, and then you see what they're working on and what they do. They might not accomplish everything, but you want to look at seeing how they're understanding the assumptions of the world, whether they're constantly keeping going with something and pushing forward with something, which is most of life, by the way. is getting people to know that there's just, constant push. And getting that there isn't something that's fixed out there, and you're pushing forward and creating things. That's what you're trying to assess on. And so all of this is really complicated in terms of, I would tell you to go do all of it. In terms of doing a proper assessment, in terms of, how to assess somebody's capabilities or skills or whatnot like that. But it's really tough because most of us educational folks, professors and instructors, have limited resources. If you're a teacher, you have limited resources. What do you do with all those kind of things? Well, for me, I'm kind of an innovation person and whatnot. And so I would assume that I would encourage you to leverage some of the resources that we have and augment what we're doing with available resources with information technology, for example. Getting people to do things that are creative in a creative space online. There's some, packages that are coming out that I've just started exploring, and I'm going to give them a pitch pack back. Discussion board software is really cool. They use AI in the background, and it's a different way of doing assessment with that because they're kind of thinking about what is going on with the environment and things like that. So looking for these tools and assessment kind of tools might get you further along because you can understand you can leverage some of the resources that you don't necessarily have and get access to those particular things. So, in terms of testing and assessment, try to get all of those. I know it's hard, and as we scale society, as things become less about, the one room classroom, which is my mom went to, and that's how crazy not long ago it was, a one-room classroom where there's a K through 8 in, and thinking about how do we scale this where we have 7.7 billion people that are doing different things. I think you should be trying to get at all of those things and leveraging some of the available information technology that we have to really start getting at those things, but also getting people to explore the domain around them, really start thinking about what it means to be a human being in this world is going to be very, very important going forward. So in terms of, if you're training physicians, for example, if you're training, business school folks, then you'd probably want to make sure that they have a core base of knowledge of concepts and things, but also get them to know that life is situational, it changes. And then as well, getting them to, really think about how they can impact the world and change the world as they are doing things and get them to actually do things. If you can get a combination of all those things, you're really going to make strides in terms of who they are as an individual, I personally think. And as well, sort of push them in terms of the, assessment of what they're trying to do, and try to look at different methods of assessment that capture all of those three different domains. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Do appreciate it. Take care, and good luck on this. I know it's really tough for all of us. We all struggle with it in terms of what we should balance, but really know that there's not really a right way. There's a way that sort of fits you, and it fits your situation, it fits your context, it fits your institution, and just go forward with that. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.